When most people consider the downfall of Rome, they visualize tribal armies smashing through the great city gates, mighty Roman legions deserting, or emperors being secretly poisoned in their grand marble halls. But huge empires rarely disintegrate simply because of outside attacks. They first decay from the inside, and one of the most destructive forces is consistently the state of its money. Rome did not just fall because of foreign armies or political corruption. It truly fell because its national currency failed, and the critical warnings from that financial collapse still perfectly apply to every modern economy that mistakenly believes it can tamper with its money supply and escape the consequences. Let's start the scene. For hundreds of years, the financial foundation of Rome was the silver denarius, first produced around the year 211 BC. It was nearly pure silver, completely trusted throughout the entire empire and beyond its borders. Roman soldiers received their pay in this coin. International merchants demanded it for trade, and ordinary citizens safely stored their entire wealth in it. The denarius was more than just money. It represented confidence forged into metal. The empire's political power and the coin's intrinsic value were completely tied together. As long as people maintained faith in the power of Rome, they also had faith in its currency. However, managing a vast empire is incredibly costly. Legions had to be continuously paid. Essential roads and aqueducts needed constant construction, and frequent wars required massive financing. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was severely strained, defending its huge borders against aggressive Germanic tribes, the Parthians in the east, and internal unrest. Tax revenues were simply not enough to cover the massive military costs. So, the emperors resorted to an ancient, predictable deception, debasement. Instead of raising taxes on citizens, a move always deeply unpopular, they gradually reduced the actual silver content inside the denarius. The raw numbers tell a shocking story. Under Emperor Augustus, who reigned at the empire's start, the denarius contained approximately 95% silver. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, that percentage had plummeted to about 50%. By the time of the chaotic Emperor Gallienus in the mid-3rd century, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. A coin once made of solid metal had become a worthless bronze disc thinly coated with silver wash. The common people could visually see and physically feel the difference in the coins they held. Rampant inflation immediately followed. Prices soared because the money was no longer connected to any real value. A standard measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius could suddenly cost several dozen. This was not just some abstract economic theory. It completely ruined the lives of average Romans. Soldiers urgently demanded higher wages to try and cover the constantly rising prices. Merchants quickly stopped accepting the debased coins, preferring to trade goods directly, barter, or demanding payment in gold. Local economic activity quickly reverted back to direct trade because the state currency could no longer be trusted, and the more public confidence disappeared, the more emperors frantically struck cheaper coins, mistakenly hoping that simply increasing the volume would somehow replace the lost value. It was a terrible, self-defeating spiral, the exact same destructive cycle that has repeated in countless inflationary disasters ever since. The crisis reached its peak during the period known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome endured nearly 50 years of total chaos, foreign invasions, devastating plagues, constant civil wars, and complete financial collapse. Emperors quickly rose and fell with dizzying speed, sometimes only ruling for a few months before being murdered. Hidden beneath all this political turmoil was a totally broken financial structure. Taxes were demanded in coins that were becoming worth less and less. Desperate farmers abandoned their essential lands rather than attempt to pay the rapidly inflating tax demands. Trade networks fractured entirely, and the Roman government tried a series of frantic, desperate measures, from setting strict price controls to forcing labor obligations, to try and keep the entire system from stopping. None of their attempts succeeded. One emperor, Diocletian, made a huge effort to stop the financial bleeding. In the year 301 AD, he published the Edict on maximum prices, attempting to legally fix the cost of over 1,000 different goods and services, everything from basic grain to labor wages. Violators were threatened with death. The edict was a complete disaster. Market prices could not be controlled by official decree when the money itself was functionally worthless. A huge black market quickly emerged, and all official trade basically stopped. People learned very quickly that the force of law could not make a broken coin valuable again. Eventually, Rome was forced to completely abandon the denarius. Constantine the Great later introduced the solidus, a gold coin of guaranteed, consistent purity, around 312 AD. It did restore some economic stability and continued to be used for centuries in the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire. But by that time, the Western Empire was already fatally weakened. The deliberate debasement of the denarius had completely hollowed out Rome's economic heart. Armies could no longer be properly financed. Essential trade routes had broken down, and public trust was irrevocably gone. The famous fall of Rome was not a single, sudden event, but a very long process of breaking apart. And the currency collapse was one of its sharpest, most destructive elements. What vital takeaway does this history offer us today? It means that the systemic destruction of money always leads to the destruction of empires. Rome believed it could cleverly trick its own people by issuing coins that looked identical but contained dramatically less actual worth. Modern governments today believe they can do the same thing by endlessly printing paper money, secretly manipulating key interest rates, or attempting to inflate away their massive national debts. But the final result is always the identical. The common people are the ones who pay the heaviest cost. Wealth is destroyed for many, and public confidence completely disappears. Rome was forced to learn this harsh lesson the most difficult way, and if we choose to ignore it, we will follow the same path. History did not suddenly stop teaching this lesson after the final Roman emperor fell. Every single major inflationary crisis since then has repeated the exact same pattern. Governments intentionally devalue the money supply to pay for their massive expenses. Wealthy elites quickly protect themselves by acquiring real, tangible assets, and the ordinary working population is left financially ruined. The Roman currency crisis is simply the earliest, most complete example, a clear blueprint for total collapse. Jump forward to the tumultuous 20th century, and the historical echoes are deafening. After the end of World War I, Germany faced enormous demands for reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The government decided to simply print paper marks to try and cover its obligations, believing it could magically cover over debt, just as Rome had once struck more coins. By 1923, hyperinflation was spiraling out of control. A simple loaf of bread that cost 1 mark before the war ended cost well over 200 billion marks by the autumn of that year. People had to haul their entire wages home in wheelbarrows. Pensioners were starving because their entire life savings had instantly evaporated. And exactly like in Rome, Those who carried large debts suddenly found them wiped clean by the inflation, while those who possessed real assets, land, productive factories, or foreign currency, emerged financially stronger. Money lost all meaning, and the resulting economic desperation fueled the political extremism that ultimately paved the way for the rise of Hitler. Zimbabwe followed this tragic path in the early 2000s, facing large-scale land seizures, plummeting agricultural production, and increasing national debts. The government resorted to turning on the money printing press. By 2008, the annual inflation rate had reached an absolutely staggering 89.7 sextillion%. Prices were literally doubling every single day. Stores could not even update their price tags fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe was forced to completely abandon its own currency, requiring citizens to trade using US dollars or the South African rand. Once more, a government foolishly believed it could deceive economic reality. Once more, the common people paid the terrible price. But you don't only need to look at these historical extremes. Even within highly developed, modern economies, the Roman pattern continues to exist. Consider the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon unilaterally removed the dollar from the gold standard, severing the final connection between the nation's currency and any physical anchor. From that specific moment, the dollar officially became what economists label a fiat currency, supported not by gold but by mere trust in the government. And just as happened in Rome, the temptation for politicians to spend far beyond the nation's means became irresistible. Over the following decades, national debt grew massive, the money supply expanded greatly, and inflation became a constant. Hidden tax. While we haven't yet witnessed people needing wheelbarrows of cash, we have experienced a persistent, steady erosion of our overall purchasing power. A single dollar in 1971 could buy what now requires more than $6 today. The coins look the same. The paper bills look identical. But the actual value has been entirely hollowed out over time. The subtle trick is always the same. Governments cleverly disguise inflation as economic growth. They constantly tell citizens that higher wages are proof of prosperity, even while the cost of basic living is increasing much faster. They repeatedly present massive national debt as a necessary investment, even when it is mainly funding current consumption. They point to rapidly rising stock markets as solid proof of national wealth, even when the vast majority of citizens own very little or no stock at all. Just like the Roman emperors, they pretend that nothing fundamental has actually changed, while quietly and systematically extracting genuine value from every coin, every dollar bill, and every weekly paycheck. What makes this situation particularly hazardous today is the global scale of the problem. Rome's collapse was a crisis within one empire. Weimar Germany's hyperinflation was contained nationally. Zimbabwe's was mostly local. But today, the entire world financial system operates on fiat currencies, interconnected massive debts, and central banks that are universally willing to print trillions of new units of currency at the very first sign of a crisis. This means that the next major collapse will likely not be restricted to a single empire or a single country. It will ripple violently across the entire globe. And if history remains our guide, the people who will suffer the most will not be the wealthy elites who hold real assets, but the millions who depend entirely on fixed salaries, retirement pensions, and bank savings denominated in these increasingly fragile currencies. So what is the most important message you, as an individual, should take away from the Roman currency crisis? First, accept that inflation is not merely an accident. It is a deliberate policy. It is the invisible tax that has successfully ruined empires for over 2,000 years. Second, realize that true, lasting wealth is not found in paper notes or easily manipulated numbers on a screen, but in physical assets that retain value when the currency fails. Land, essential skills, productive businesses, and real resources. Third, never assume that stability is permanent. Average Romans in the 1st century would have loudly laughed if you told them their dependable coins would one day be totally worthless. Germans in 1913 would have scoffed at the bizarre idea of needing wheelbarrows full of cash to buy groceries. Zimbabweans in the 1980s genuinely believed their nation's independence guaranteed lasting prosperity. Yet, in every single case, the exact same devastating story unfolded. The fall of Rome powerfully reminds us that financial systems can break down slowly for a long time, and then completely, terrifyingly suddenly, as all public trust rapidly evaporates. When the money stops representing real value, society itself begins to completely unravel. Contracts are ignored. Trade breaks down entirely. Armies lose all motivation, and governments lose their essential legitimacy. The foreign armies at the gate may deliver the final blow, but the true killer is always found inside the government treasury. And here is the final, potent takeaway. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but if you choose to foolishly ignore its lessons, it will surely crush you all the same. The Roman currency disaster was not just about terrible emperors or corrupt elites. It was fundamentally about the inherent weakness of money itself when that money is recklessly abused by concentrated power. And that weakness has absolutely never gone away. If this analysis has given you a valuable new way to see things, please hit the subscribe button. History holds the answers to our future, and I'll keep showing you exactly where you must look to find them.